Good afternoon from Bochum, Germany. It is a pleasure to be here today with all of you. I would like to warmly thank you, the organizer, for inviting me to discuss this very timely matter. My name is Mireia Paulo. I'm a research associate and lecturer at Ruhr-Universität Bochum and a senior consultant at ANC law firm. I will be talking about the EU's approach to the digital component of the EU's Asia connectivity strategy in relation to Northeast Asian partners, People's Republic of China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, as strategic partnerships and major tech powers. This presentation is part of a forthcoming article under the framework of an international research project called Strategies for Promoting Europe-Asia Connectivity under a Monnet network, where I am a member. This research should be understood as a first step to lay the foundations for a long-term project. From an EU-level perspective, it examines to which extent the digital component of the connectivity strategy vis-a-vis Asia is developed, and it looks at the role of the EU strategic partnerships in Northeast Asia in enhancing digital connectivity. It does so by analyzing case studies concerning infrastructure, security and cloud computing, and regulation data. Remember the conceptualization approach that Bridget just explained? This research applies the same conceptualization framework. The case studies will refer to infrastructure and regulation, which are two of the three elements of the digital connectivity definition. In addition to the case studies, analysis is based on interviews with diplomats, civil servants, and practitioners, mainly attorneys and private sector working on digital and tech matters. And of course, my own practice at the law firm in China with tech companies. Finally, I will briefly share some preliminary recommendations and conclusions. The relevance of digital issues is hardly disputed these days. The fact alone that I am addressing you today in a virtual forum and that this has become a daily practice for most of us shows that the digital age is no longer a vision for the future, but that it has become a reality, while the opportunities that digitalization and new technologies offer us appear boundless. Recent months have also opened our eyes to the challenges and the vulnerabilities that the digital transition brings. The digital transition needs to be viewed in the context of a parallel transition of the international system. We can observe an increasing return to hard geopolitics, with China economic, political, and technological rise, which has been reflected in increasing tensions between the US and the PRC. Europe is certainly not immune to these developments, and of course, it is not blind to these challenges. For example, representatives from the European External Action Service have stated that Europe is involved in a trade data conflict. Unsurprisingly, many European initiatives have been launched to better equip the EU for the digital age. Perhaps most importantly in the context of this event is the connectivity strategy for Asia. But for becoming a major global digital player, the EU cannot do so alone. Hence, to foster strategic partnerships is part of the strategy. As I will discuss later, the engagement with major tech powers in Northeast Asia clearly reflects a desire of the EU's part to cooperate in this field. As I just hinted at, the EU has launched a variety of initiatives and legislation in recent years to strengthen its position in the digital realm. You can see some examples on this slide. In relation to the case studies that we are going to present today, you have strategies such as the neo-industrial strategy, cybersecurity strategy, European Open Science Cloud, and AI white paper, just to name a few of them. All this shows that digital issues have become a top priority at all levels of the EU. These measures have an external dimension, or have also an external dimension. For example, the EU wants to project the influence of its regulatory approach internationally. The so-called European way, or European model, or normative power, or Brussels effect, meaning to export EU's norms and values beyond its borders. An example of that could be GDPR regulation. Part of the EU efforts are to catch up with the industrial data wave, while mitigating risks in vulnerable sectors and ensuring the reliable use of data. For this, the EU's current digital approach is based on establishing global standards, supporting research cooperation, and promoting regulatory approaches. Of course, it is not all sunshine and roses, and many, particularly in private sector, have pointed out the European commercial and security weaknesses, generating doubts on the EU's ability to achieve a global digital position. Before looking at the EU's relation with China, Japan, and South Korea, I want to mention the digital connectivity framework in Asia, as it points out which role the EU plays vis-a-vis Northeast Asian partners. As you see on the slide, on the one hand, the strategy is a good starting point for strengthening the EU's presence in the region and a good framework for action. Yet, the strategy lacks key aspects: the scope, definition of terms, political ownership, strategic, regional, and sectorial priorities vis-a-vis partners. On the other hand, we observe regional aspects in the digital arena that should be taken into account when examining the EU's role in relation to Northeast Asian partners, such as Europe is not alone in engaging in digital connectivity, nor it is a first mover in this area. China, as already mentioned by the other speaker, has been able to gain a head start on digital connectivity, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative. There is also a digital gap with different speeds and degrees in Asia or in Asian countries. And we should bear in mind that several Asian states have attempted to develop sovereign internets and issue national regulations, which pose a serious problem in the applicability of the laws, such as data protection. Taking into consideration this framework, then the following questions are considered. To which extent is the digital component of the EU's connectivity strategy vis-a-vis Asia developed in relation to Northeast Asian partners? And what's the role of their strategic partnerships in Northeast Asia in enhancing digital connectivity? Allow me here briefly to mention that the EU engages with the region in relation to digital connectivity, both on bilateral level and interregional level. And it does so in different areas, as you can see on the slide. For upcoming research, it will be very interesting to look at the ASEAN-EU joint ministerial connectivity, as well as ASEF upcoming programs. Let's start with the PRC. As the EU's relationship with China on digital issues is perhaps the most complex of the states discussed here, I will start with China. China has undergone a meteoric technological rise, partly due to the government support, and has become a major global tech player. This, among other factors, has generated suspicions and a litany of concerns expressed by European, US media, government, businesses, and civil society about China's practices. It cannot be denied that some fundamental differences persist between both actors. Nevertheless, the EU has attempted to force a meaningful cooperation regarding digital issues. And what do I mean by that? There is a degree of actual cooperation in the form of agreements and joint actions. Joint actions could be distinguished into material resources or commitments towards norms and standards. We can mention a few examples. Since 2009, the respective ministries maintain an annual dialogue on ICT, covering digital policies and regulatory issues. Then, the EU-China 2020 Strategic Agenda added a cyber chapter. At the end of 2020 last year, a high-level digital dialogue was established covering standard setting, AI, digital taxation, and research and innovation. This is the first time that we have in an institutionalized dialogue referring just to digital affairs. Related to telecom infrastructure, meaning 5G wireless network and cloud computing, allow me to mention some issues here about standards and cooperation on 5G. We agree that on the international level, China is trying to increase its influence on global standards, submitting numerous proposals for new technical committees at the International Organization for Standardization and the International Electrotechnical Commission. Based on the interviews conducted, interviewers stated that the actual impact of technical standards is still limited since many proposals are rejected due to quality issues. In addition, Huawei presented a new Internet Protocol IP standard proposal, which raised worries among European and US administrations and businesses about the multinational intentions. Multinational intentions were trying to be reduced by issuing some letters explaining the intentions behind it. Still, concerns are there. On the domestic level, the China Standards 2035 plan has been published, raising concerns too. Again, from interviewers working in the legal field and private sector in China, it was generally mentioned that domestic limitations in relation to these standards, impacts, and applications exist. Some companies are a bit reluctant to apply those instead or in addition to international standards, especially those companies that have operations overseas. Because you can imagine implementing different standard settings for companies is quite costly, not just in terms of budget, but also in terms of resources and timeline. Nonetheless, all these issues is a very interesting area to have an eye on. When looking at 5G, let's first do an aide-memoire of the EU-China cooperation on 5G. Back to 2015, we had seen a European agreement on 5G telecommunication system. It was based on other agreements already signed with Japan and South Korea during the same year. Important issues at that time were appropriate radio frequency bands, explore services and applications for 5G, especially in areas such as IoT, smart cities, e-health, intelligent transport, education, e-banking, so pretty similar to current issues. And of course, awareness of the usage of 5G. This to show that issues in this area are not new, but further complexity takes place with current security risks about 5G equipment and interference of third states. As such, the European Commission launched the 5G Toolbox and Risk Assessment Report, resulting in enhancing or in enacting member states' new regulation. And we can mention a few, for example, the German IT Security Act and the upcoming Spanish Act. But security concerns also offer room for collaboration. For instance, through the EU-China Cyber Task Force and data protection. China cybersecurity law, data security law, by the way, just passed on June 10th this year, 2021. And the upcoming personal information protection law, this law is still in a draft process, in the second draft actually. And during the interviews, attorneys have recognized the influence of the EU's GDPR in the draft of the PIL. And we can mention a few examples, such as the territorial scope, application to all personal information processing activities. Here we can see very similar wording with the Article 3 of the GDPR. And also it requires an offshore data processor that in the PIL appears in the Article 52. And also a data protection officer could be required, and that is in the Article 53. Interviewers have also stated that there are significant differences in regards to legal ground, rights, obligation, and cross-border data transfers. For example, one of the, let's say, main concerns for foreign companies is Article 41 that appears in PIL, which stipulates that any request by a foreign law enforcement agency to retrieve data stored within the PRC will be subject to prior clearance with the competent Chinese authority. We can conclude that the EU has attempted to establish a solid partnership while simultaneously is trying to navigate risk and ensuring security. EU representatives are juggling market competition, geopolitics, and rules-based approach to find its own way on how to deal with China. Let us move on the EU's relationship with Japan. This is a very stable and close relationship based on shared values, as it is reflected in the strategic partnership established in 2018. Japan has, partly in reaction to China's brief, become very active in the field of regional and global connectivity in recent years. This is, for example, reflected in its Partnership for Quality Infrastructure, which offers a Japanese vision for the comprehensive improvement of connectivity in Asia. Unsurprisingly, given the close relationship, the EU and Japan have opened a variety of venues for cooperation on digital connectivity. In 2019, both sides concluded the EU-Japan Sustainable Connectivity and Quality Infrastructure Partnership Agreement. At the same time, Japan has signed the US-Japan Global Digital Connectivity Partnership that builds upon the previous strategic digital economy partnership. Now, since this has occurred very recently, we don't know yet the outcomes, but definitely we should ask ourselves what implications to EU-Japan digital connectivity partnership and to what extent. So this definitely is an element to look at and needs to be further researched. Data governance has been a key issue in the agenda of EU-Japan cooperation in digital affairs. Japan has the first partner, or has been the first partner to join the EU's global free flow of non-personal data within the data free flow with trust framework. In addition, the EU and Japan have recognized each other's data protection regime as equivalent, which is an important first step towards international harmonization of data regulation. However, possible inconsistency could exist as Japan is simultaneously member of different organizations. Yet, excellent opportunity for the EU to promote its Brussels effect. In terms of internet governance and security, partners have worked together on global cyber governance. Both parties have sought closer cooperation in the fight against cybercrime. They share the goal of promoting the adoption of existing international law in cyberspace. For example, in 2009, the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty was signed. Currently, the Cyber Dialogue and the ICT Policy Dialogue constitute two important venues for bilateral discussions too. Since Japan has banned Chinese companies in 5G network rollout, Civil servants and some practitioners mentioned in the interviews that this could offer opportunities for cooperation, particularly when looking at research and innovation initiatives on developing 60 technologies. Still something to look at, very, very early stage to clearly make a statement, but something to look at. In the case of the Republic of Korea, it is also considered a close partner, sharing values and norms. The most important milestones in framing this partnership, as you can see on the screen, you have 4 of them, right? And these 4 agreements created framework of this partnership, strategic partnership. However, the bilateral relationships still are hardly visible in the eyes of the public or the public opinion, and probably or pointed out by interviewers, this should be addressed to improve. Now, when it comes to digital issues, actually, both partners are committed to enhance cooperation, and they have been working in different areas. For example, South Korea is widely seen as a leader in the digital transition and digital economy. However, certain events demonstrated in the past years lack of adequate response mechanisms and its vulnerability to cyber attacks and cybersecurity threats. Consequently, a national cybersecurity strategy was launched in 2019. In this context, the fight against cybercrime is a key element for the EU and ROK cooperation. Discussions have been institutionalized in the cyber dialogue and the ICT dialogue since 2015. In regards to the 5G network rollout, there is a more complex scenario in comparison to Japan, since ROK deals with the bargaining of security trade. So on one hand, still need to do a lot of trade and economic relationship with PRC. On the other side, it has some concerns on the application of certain Chinese equipment. However, it has not made any straightforward or assertive decision, such as Japan. Nonetheless, there are several research centers between EU and ROK companies, and similar to Japan, research and innovation initiatives on 60 technology is perceived as an interesting path to explore more. In relation to personal data flow across borders, both governments reached an agreement for the adequacy decision this March 2021. And on June 16th, this year, again, 2021, the European Commission then launched the procedure for the adoption of an adequacy decision for transfers of personal data to South Korea under the General Data Protection Regulations of the GDPR. The draft adequacy decision was published and transmitted to the European Data Protection Board for its opinion. If adopted, because we don't know yet, but if adopted, it could be complement the EU Republic of Korea Free Trade Agreement, the FTA, right? And probably it's supposed to boost cooperation between the EU and the ROK in bilateral trade of goods and services. For achieving this recognition, it is worthy to mention that ROK regulators issued Personal Information Protection Act, which provides similar principles, safeguards, and individual rights and obligations as the EU law. In addition, it strengthens the powers of Personal Information Protection Commission. This is an independent data protection authority, and it is a mandatory requirement in order to obtain the adequacy decision. Therefore, it's quite important, or it's quite relevant, this the creation of this commission and the strengthening of powers as an independent agency. EU civil servants hold that this is an example of the EU exporting data protection rules, exporting norms and standards, although practitioners, many lawyers, mention the risk of inconsistency. The risk of inconsistency was mentioned before in the case of Japan. And so in ROK, in the case of ROK, it's quite similar since South Korea also endorsed the cross-border privacy rule system. Yet, room for cooperation and to keep an eye on. Moving to the next slide, despite of some example that shows EU's exporting norms and rules, advancing cooperation on data governance, research and innovation, cybersecurity, yet more needs to be done. In the next few minutes, I would like to introduce preliminary recommendations that could enable the EU to leverage the potential of a more strategic digital connectivity with its partners. Let me start by mentioning that a fully fledged strategy for digital connectivity, ensuring the external dimension of domestic strategy and policies such as Data Act or the cybersecurity package or the industrial strategy is necessary, especially if the EU wants to achieve a strong global digital position. In this context, it would be very interesting a benchmark of strategic priorities, including new technologies. And this is perceived as something that really needs to be created. The EU should continue cooperation and regulation. Of course, some differences will remain, such as legal systems, privacy regimes. However, collaboration could be extended to issues such as technical requirements, evaluation procedures, risk coordination mechanisms, and so on. Leveraging the EU's normative power in the digital component is important. It's important to defending the EU's interests, but it should not be based only on regulatory power, values, and norms. If we take into consideration the more competitive geopolitical environment, the EU or the EU institution definitely should look to other aspects as well. A multi-stakeholder approach should be considered, or more considered. One measure to do so might be to establish permanent expert platforms for EU-Asia cooperation on digital issues or bilateral level, as has already happened on the EU level. So for example, I'm thinking this could be linked to leverage private sector from Northeast Asian partners willing to be part of the European cloud computing ecosystem, or applying to the European 5G certification scheme forthcoming next year in 2022. Related to civil society, this is quite new initiative, but perhaps the Next Generation Internet Initiative, which is a platform that links research, policy, and society, may be a good collaboration with civil society groups in Northeast Asian countries. So far, and after discussing with some of the organizers in this initiative, it seems they don't have yet developed many ambassadors or members from Asia, and particularly for Northeast Asian countries. So it could be interesting to look at this initiative. Overall, it is clear that the EU institutions identify the urgency and relevance of digital connectivity. It also takes into consideration the importance of its strategic partnerships in Asia, particularly Northeast Asian countries, for achieving a strong global digital position and exporting its rule-based approach internationally, shaping data governance and enhancing cybersecurity. And a note here, I focus in Northeast Asian partners that further empirical studies should be conducted in relation to interregional cooperation such as ASEAN and other strategic actors such as India or the region of Indo-Pacific, very much on the agenda nowadays. In this regard, the EU is enhancing, at least attempting, its role in the digital element of the connectivity strategy vis-a-vis Northeast Asian partners, as strategic partners and major tech actors in the region. For this, high-level meetings, forums, initiatives, and actions have been institutionalized with all three countries, dealing with priority issues such as data governance and cybersecurity. While the cooperation with Japan and Korea seems relatively smoothly, substantive achievements are still limited or timid. When it comes to China, the EU has adopted a more complex strategy. It recognizes the need for cooperation, but it is also keen to mitigate against risk in the areas where concerns are most present. You may notice that I brought in some slides the US factor, particularly in the case of China and Japan, but not in the case of ROK. Part of the findings, particularly when discussing with practitioners, lawyers, and private sector, they regularly mention the risk of US legislation, competition, and digital strategic interests as a potential risk to a certain degree hampering European companies, tech developments, and also cooperation in application of data-free flow with trust and application of international standards for new technologies. This is an aspect that should be further studied, but it's worth it to mention as part of the findings of the research. The EU has the political resources and instruments to build a clear digital connectivity towards Asia. Nonetheless, success in a distinctive contribution will depend on the implementation phase, which requires a certain degree of specificity guarding the EU's unity, working on key priorities at different levels, seeking alliances, and of course, adequate financing. And with that being said, I would like to thank you for your attention and look forward to any questions, comments, and hopefully a very lively and productive discussion. Thank you very much.